The goal of this game is to see how many sandwiches the player can create within 10 seconds by clicking the sandwich ingredient buttons. When given the theme 10 seconds or less, I had a bunch of ideas floating about, but the main one that kept coming back to me was a game where you create sandwiches as fast as possible. Originally I was going to do it where you was a parent trying to make sandwiches for your kids, but I eventually changed this idea to the player playing as some sort of sandwich artist working in a cafe. To give the impression the player was working in a cafe, I needed to create a head chef character, so I went online and looked at reference images of chefs, but none of these were really what I envisioned. Then I remembered the character that I had seen in a Disney film called Luca, where there was a fisherman character, and I used that character as a base reference for the chef. Alongside creating the chef, I decided to design the ingredient buttons and the plate so that all the assets were unique. I created all assets in Clip Studio Paint and then imported them into Unity. Once all assets were imported into Unity, I began creating the scenes in the game. This would consist of a start screen which would introduce the player to the chef and the main premise of the game, along with a button to go to the gameplay. Next would be an actual main gameplay scene, and the last scene would be the end screen, which would tell the player how many sandwiches they had created and a restart button to replay the game. After I created all the scenes, I would go back to the start screen and code the start button so it would go to the gameplay scene. This was pretty straightforward, that only required one line of code that told Unity to load the gameplay scene once the player had clicked the start button. Next was to create the main gameplay scene, which was actually quite hard to do. I had to first add the ingredient spawner on the plate, which would spawn the ingredients when the player would click the corresponding buttons. And I would write the code so that when a button is pressed, it would spawn the ingredients on the plate. I then had to code it so when the second bread spawned, it would remove all ingredients from the plate and add 1 to the score. With that working, I had to code the timer so that it counted down from 10, and once it hit 0, it would load the end scene. The very last thing to code was the end scene, which required the scene to show the final score and the replay button. Both were pretty straightforward. As for the final score, I had to reference the score script and make it so that it would show the score on the end scene. And as for the restart button, I used the same script as the start button, but made sure that the score resetted to 0 once gameplay had restarted. Overall, I had a bunch of issues when making this game, as coding is not my strongest skill, but by following YouTube tutorials and asking my peers for help, I eventually figured it out. However, there was one issue I wasn't able to fix, which was that the player could spam the bread button and the score would increase. If I made this into a fully finished game, I would fix that issue, but also change it so that specific keys had to be pressed to spawn ingredients so that it would be easier for the player to beat their high score.